بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. We finished at the end of session 2 discussing the first and most outward part of taqwa, that which pertains to the 7 limbs. And that Sayyidi Abdul Wahid ibn Ashur radiallahu anhu, that he taught us that we have 7 limbs. And part of taqwa is to preserve these 7 limbs. And the 7 limbs are our eyes, our ears, our tongues, our stomachs, our private parts, our hands, and our feet. And part of taqwa is watching over these 7 limbs. And that putting these 7 limbs into a state, making them subservient to the heart, and ultimately to be in doing that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, avoiding that which would distance us from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we discussed a little bit about each one of these limbs, and we could have gone into much greater detail. But the idea of protecting, watching over our limbs. However, that the limbs, as we briefly touched upon yesterday, don't act in and of themselves, is that the limbs are connected to our heart. And it is the heart that is the source of all of the actions on the limbs. And a hadith that is quoted often, but it's worthy to be quoted every day. We should remind ourselves ideally of this hadith many times a day if possible. Where our Prophet ﷺ informed us, إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُدْغَةً. Indeed, in the human body is a mudgha, a piece of flesh. إِذَا صَلُحَتْ صَلُحَ الْجَسَدْ كُلُّهُ. That if it becomes wholesome, that the entire body becomes wholesome. وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدْ كُلُّهُ. And that if it becomes corrupt, that if it diverts from the state of being wholesome, that this has repercussions throughout the entire human body and entire human existence. And so the heart is our 6th sense. That we have the 5 senses outwardly which all perceive certain things. And each one of those 5 senses has some type of beauty that it naturally perceives. Some type of pleasure that is naturally associated with it. There's certain pleasures that people see with the eye. There's certain pleasures that people hear with the ear. There's certain pleasures that people smell. There's certain pleasures that people touch, and so forth. And that the heart likewise has pleasures associated with it. It is a sense in that sense, and as Imam Ghazali calls it, the 6th sense. And it has various things that it deems to be beautiful. And now the heart in and of itself is something that is intangible to the human being. Because when we talk about the heart in this context, we're not talking about the pine cone shaped lump of flesh that is in our chest slightly to the left, that has ventricles and is the source of the pumping the blood throughout our system. That's not what we mean here by this type of heart. What we mean here is that the latifa rabbaniya, the subtle spiritual entity within the human being, that makes us truly human, through which we know, through which we have consciousness, through which that we can attain ma'rifah and knowledge of our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this is what we mean by the heart. Now that the heart, that there is ajaib, there is wonders associated with it, and that the heart at times that it needs to be navigated, and that we tend to forget that the internal realm is much more expansive than the external realm. I heard a modern scholar say is that everything that we understand from the outward realm, and perhaps it's even expanding, compared to the realm of the psyche, that it's just as if it's nothing. And then the outward realm and the realm of the psyche, compared to the realm of the ruh, of the spirit, and all of the other dimensions of existence, is something as if it is in reality nothing. So that the internal aspect of the human being is expansive. And one of the great scholars said is that سُمِّيَتْ فُؤَادْ فُؤَادْ, that لِأَنَّ فِيهِ أَلْفْ وَادْ وَفِي كُلِّ وَادْ أَلْفْ وَادْ. He says that the fu'ad, which is one of the names of the hearts, is one of the names of the heart. And according to Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi, that it is it is the third level. And according to Hakim al-Tirmidhi, that of the 4 Quranic terms that refer to the heart, it's the third level. That you have the sadr, the qalb, the fu'ad, and the lub. These are all Quranic terms. You have the chest, you have the heart, you have the inner heart, which is the fu'ad, and then you have the lub, which is the innermost core. And he has a treatise where he discusses that how these all relate to one another. But the idea here is that what this Imam said is that the heart is called the fu'ad because it has alf wad. A wad is a valley. So the heart has 1,000 valleys. And in each valley is 1,000 valleys. Meaning that there's wonders that are taking place within. And that this is why it's so important to understand in general the greatness of the heart and the wonders of the heart. That even if we don't understand its true nature, that we can understand in general what exists there. Because that if there are things taking place here, within the expanse of our heart, that is affecting our behavior out here, then it's worthy for us to know exactly what is the nature of this heart and what is taking place therein. Because there's certain things that get lodged in there in different ways, from what we channel in through our senses, in particular though our eyes and our ears, and things get lodged in the heart. And that there's ways that behavior outwardly is affected because you have this particular thing lodged in your heart. Were you to dislodge it and purify it, that you wouldn't have that behavioral pattern outwardly. And so that the heart is of utmost importance. So the lines that we'll be covering today are the following. ويوقف الأمور حتى يعلم ما الله فيهن به قد حكم يطهر القلب من الرياء وحسد وعجب وكل داء واعلم بأن أصل الآفات حب الرياسة وطرح الآتي رأس الخطايا هو حب العاجلة ليس الدواء إلا في الضرار له. So Sidi Abdul Wahid ibn Ashur says that he abstains from pursuing all matters until he ascertains what Allah has judged about their legal status. He purifies his heart from ostentatious piety, malicious envy, vanity, and all other diseases of the heart. Know well that the origin of all these ills is love of leadership and procrastination. The fountainhead of all misdeeds is love of the fleeting world, which has no cure but to be compelled to flee to Him. MashaAllah. To flee to Him. I actually didn't read that first, but we were just talking about fleeing to Him. So the first line here says, وَيُوقِفُ الْأُمُورَ حَتَّى يَعْلَمَ مَا اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ بِهِ قَدْ حَكَمَ. That this is a principle of the spiritual path and of the law. Is that we need to learn to abstain from pursuing matters until we know the hukum, till we know the judgment of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala in that particular affair. And so meaning that knowledge is the imam of amal. Knowledge is the imam of action. That you can't really have action unless you have knowledge. This is why knowledge remains supreme. And we see in the very structure of a book like the Yahya al-Din by Hujjat al-Islam al-Ghazali that the first book is on knowledge. And then the 40th book, that even though that it's discussing the afterlife, in reality that it is also related to knowledge. Because it is the knowledge that we have of the certainty of death which propels one then to embark upon the spiritual path. This is one of the greatest things about which we have certainty, that this is a starting point that leads to a treading of the path, that leads to an experiential knowledge. And so in a book like the Yahya that has been arranged according to the sacred number of 40, is that every book that proceeds, every book that continues, there's a certain shedding of the soul that is taking place until one becomes complete by the end. But it begins ultimately with knowledge. And that not only do we have to begin with knowledge, we have to begin with our own theory and understanding of knowledge. That we tend to forget. We have a theory of knowledge. We have a philosophy of education. That we have a way that you even approach the various sciences. And that Muslims, as we are exposed to various other philosophies of education and various other theories of how we know, is that if we're not rooted in our own tradition, that we're going to be played with left and right. And we're not going to understand that how to integrate what it is that we're learning into an Islamic ethos. And this is because human beings think in frames. We don't think at the realm of individual ideas. We think in frames. And that oftentimes that you'll have a Muslim who's been trained in with secular education, that even though they're Muslim and they say La ilaha illallah, they're thinking in an entirely secular frame. And perhaps this is what is meant, and Allah Ta'ala knows best, by one of the signs of the end of time, that you'll have people that are Arabiyyat al-lisan wa ajamiyyat al-qulub. You have people that outwardly they speak Arabic, right? But internally they're non-Arab, because as if they don't reflect the Islamic tradition. And so you have people outwardly that appear to be Muslim, but inwardly that much of their thoughts, that they're very foreign to the way that we see things. And so we need to ground ourselves in the way that we look at the world. And don't think that it's something, basic. That yes, there's an idea of simplicity to it, because this is from the beauty of Islam, is that part of it is in its simplicity. But it's simple in terms of the basic foundations, but then that in terms of its implications and the way that it's drawn out, it's of the utmost sophistication. So he's encouraging us here to know, before we get into anything, that we have to know what is the hukm of Allah. What is the judgment pertaining to this? And this is an obligation, is that we have, as we mentioned, the fard al-ayn, the individual obligations, is that you have to know those. But even beyond prayer and tahara and purification and fasting if you're going to fast, and zakat if you're going to give your zakat out, and the pilgrimage, knowledge of that if you're going to perform it, that anything else you do as well. If you're going to get married, that you have to know the rulings pertaining to marriage. If you're going to enter into the business world, you have to know the rulings associated with those. That if you need to wash a dead body, you have to know the rulings pertaining to those, and so forth and so on. Is that we have to know the rulings. And alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to live in a time that even though people are in different places in the world, is that we have access now through the internet. We should see the internet as a blessing. That this is something that my teachers ingrained in me, is that everything that Allah Ta'ala has created, you should use it as a way to benefit you. Yes, we all know that the majority of the internet, we know the backbone of the internet, we know a lot of the shar and the evil that it's used for. But for the believer, that it can be used as a blessing, and that we're not going to get out of a world without internet. So we need to teach ourselves and our children and our community how to responsibly use it. It's a blessing. How could it not be a blessing to be able to learn from a teacher who's on the other side of the world, whereas you wouldn't have been able to be there right now? We're recording lessons right now that inshallah are going to be offered online bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and that alhamdulillah through Seekers Guidance and other institutions like Qibla and many of the other online organizations that are opening up, that there's an opportunity for people to learn in ways that they didn't have before. And that one of the greatest proofs of this knowledge without barriers for me was, there are people throughout the world, and Sheikh Faraz Rabbani told me a story that when he was recently in Guyana, that someone came up to him and thanked him for establishing this Knowledge Without Barriers initiative. And he said that even where the cost only costs like $2, he said, I don't even have a credit card to register it. He said, Jazakumullah khair. He said, may Allah Ta'ala reward you. And meaning that, alhamdulillah, that there's different meanings, but we all have taken freely and need to give back freely. And that the spirit of education for us, learning is not something that's just for the elite. And in fact, in general, with Islamic history, that learning was usually the property of the poor, which is really interesting. Is that if you look at the number of scholars that were wealthy compared to the number of scholars that were poor, that I'm sure that the study would prove to be that the latter were much greater in number. So we need to teach ourselves we have to know what we're doing before we get into it. And just as in the outward world, you wouldn't take a travel, you wouldn't have come to Tennessee unless you prepared for it. Likewise, in our religious affairs. And then he says, يطهر القلب من الرياء وحسد وعجب وكل داء. He purifies his heart from ostentatious piety, riya, showing off, and hasad, which is envy, and ujab, which is vanity, self-conceit, وكل داء, and all other diseases of the heart. So he mentions three here. He talks about ostentation, riya, envy, hasad, and vanity, which is ujab. And so that these are the three primary diseases of the heart. That just as that the tongue, if you can learn to control it, you'll have a ground and you'll be able to control the other limbs of your body. That likewise, that if you can learn to overcome these three main diseases, that you'll be given tawfiq to be able to overcome the others. So the first is riya. And riya we're translating here as ostentation. But what we mean here is ostentation in a religious sense. And that riya, its reality is seeking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for an act of worship. And juxtaposed to riya, the opposite of riya, is ikhlas, where someone moves into a state of utter sincerity. And the idea of ikhlas is on a form that means that if someone has a number of different intentions that they can possibly make, is that they choose the choicest and the most pure. This is what ikhlas is that it's taking the choice part of the milk out of the milk. When you shake it, it becomes butter. So it's taking the butter out of the milk. And likewise, when it comes to your intentions, of all the possible intentions and thoughts that come to your heart, that you choose the best of them. And that's sincerity. Whereas riya is the opposite. Is it where you're still caught up with people. You're still noticing people. You're doing things for people. And that, as one of them said, مَا هَلَكَ النَّاسِ إِلَّا النَّاسِ, that only people have ever destroyed other people. Meaning that how many times do we find people have absolutely tormented themselves time and time again, worried about what people think, doing things for other people, and that if we could become sincere in this regard, and we could reach the state really where we're detached and what other people think of us, or what other people encourage us or disencourage us, their thoughts on the whole thing, that we become detached from it, that you will be in a tranquil state and you will have a deep sense of purity that people will envy you for and wish that they could have. Because that so many of our decisions, so many of even our psychological troubles are because that we're worried about other people, or we're doing things for other people, and that that our deen is teaching us to do things for the sake of Allah wa ta'ala, and that this is not something that is easy. Because that we're human beings, and that we naturally that are concerned about what other people think. But that you can train yourself to do this, and that it's not easy, but you can do it. So that riya, ostentation, that its reality is doing an ibadah, a form of worship for other than the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And there's different degrees. The worst of all is the lowest degree, which is the riya of the munafiqeen, of the hypocrites, where that outwardly they profess faith, but there's no reality to their faith internally. It's just sheer and total hypocrisy. That's the worst level of all. Then the next level is where someone's a believer, but when it comes to a particular worship, that where there not to be people there, they wouldn't do it. So they don't pray around other people. And that then when someone comes, is that they're just worried about those people, so they pray only for those people, not for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. That is Sharia. Someone should pray that regardless of people, and that we should be of the level of thabat, that we should be at the level of firmness in the deen, were every single person on the face of this earth to leave Islam is that we remain. We should ask Allah Ta'ala for thabat, is that were every single person on the face of this earth to leave Islam is that we remain, believing in these haqa'iq and these realities. Because this happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There was people that became Muslim, there's people that left Islam. That this is something that we know. We know people that have become Muslim, and we know people that have left Islam. But we need to reach a level of thabat where our acceptance of the truth is not associated with people. Right? We know truth as truth is. One of the most profound statements of Imam Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the ultimate confirmer of truth, is he said, "Araftu Rabbi bi Rabbi." He said that I knew my Lord through my Lord. And that is one of the most amazing philosophical / theological / metaphysical statements that could possibly be said. Is that he knew his Lord through his Lord. Right? Meaning that there was nothing in Allah Ta'ala's creation that could take him away from his Lord. That in fact that he only saw creation after first seeing his Lord and witnessing his Lord. He knew creation itself from that it being a manifestation of his Lord, not the opposite. Generally speaking, when we're in the realm of intellect, is that we use the world to help us prove the existence of God. Whereas Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is saying that no, the veil was removed and I saw in my heart the reality of God's existence and His divine impact upon creation, and I knew the world only as it is a manifestation of one of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That, someone of that state, is that there's nothing anyone can do to distance him from Allah. That's going to be the highest level of thabat. And as we see, this is why he became a Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa nafa'ana bih. So the second level is that we're someone to be there, that one only does that particular act of worship because that other person is there. Were they not to have been there, they wouldn't have done it. The third level is that they're believers. They do acts of worship whether or not people are there. But when other people are there, that they get an increased amount of energy. So that, they don't normally pray 10 rak'ahs or, after Maghrib, or they don't normally pray 8 rak'ahs for duha prayer, but there's several people there, they get all this energy, so then they all of a sudden are praying more than they usually pray. So meaning the fact that people are there, that they have an increased energy. Oh, ajib. Why do you have increased energy? That the fact that people are there, that you get increased energy, means that you're doing it for them. Whereas if they're gone, do you still have that same energy to pray those 8 rak'ahs of duha? That increased energy is a riyah. And that the point here is that this opens up a door that will just take a quick tangent. It's one of the most miraculous things about the human being, is that the human being, in order for us to function, the ahwa, which are the desires, the caprice of the human being, is the ghidha of the anfus. And there's a whole book that's been written about this. It's one of the most amazing books I've ever seen and been exposed to, called Idah Asrar Ulum al-Muqarrabin. And it's written by Imam Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Shaykh al-Aydurus, that he's buried in Surat in India. And that the whole book was written to describe how someone can be from the Ahl Haqiqat al-Tawheed. One of the things that my teachers make after the dua that they make after every prayer, Allahumma ja'alna min ahli haqiqat al-tawheed. That Allah bless us to be from the people of the reality of Tawheed, who don't just profess Tawheed with their tongues, that beyond that is that they are experiencing the realities of Tawheed and into its various degrees. And it's one of the greatest du'as that we can make. Allahumma ja'alna min ahli haqiqat al-tawheed. And this book was written as a way to prepare someone to be from the Ahl Haqiqat al-Tawheed. This is what is behind someone attaining the station. which is that this is what we should be seeking, that we shouldn't be content with just the mere tawheed of the tongue. That Imam Ghazali divides tawheed into 4 different categories. And he gives us an analogy to understand it, and that you have the outer shell, the outer husk, and the inner husk, and you have the shell, and you have the outer husk and the inner husk. You have the kernel, and you have the oil, and each one is according to a various degree of tawheed, and but here understanding that the individual caprice, the desires, are the sustenance of the soul, meaning it's like fuel to the soul. And so you can't not have fuel, right? You can never rid yourself of desire, right? But it's about what is, when you purify your desire, that is what's going to motivate you along the path. So one of the things that he mentions in this book is that were it not to be for desire, one of the wisdoms behind hawa and desire is so that people's affairs can be taken care of. Meaning that if people didn't have desire to make money, how would we be able to buy clothes? That think about what people do for money. The places that they travel, the work that they put in, and on and on and on and on and on. Everything that they do for money, everything that they do for status, everything they do for all of these things, which are nothing other than desires. And meaning that people are motivated and they will go to school for 25 years just because their parents want them to become a doctor so they could be respected in the community and they could have a nice salary and live in their mansion in the suburbs and so forth. Now, not everyone is having that intention, but a lot of people are. Is that their intention, they didn't intend once in their life to become a doctor to really heal people and to really take people by the hand and to really treat them. That some people did, but oftentimes a lot of people didn't. Is that everything that's motivating them from the beginning to end is all related to people. And that energy that they get is nothing other than riyā. And I was just using the example of the doctor, but it applies in other ways as well. Meaning that extra energy that you get behind it, that we have to be very careful when that happens, when we have extra energy. And when we find that we're lazy and we don't want to do something, that's a sign that that very thing that we want to do is what's very good for us. And that were we to do it in that moment, that even though it's that difficult, that it will lead to a huge door being opened for us, because it's not something that our self necessarily wants to do. So anyways, that's a whole topic in of itself, understanding what's behind the very energy that we get and how that pertains to the desires. But this is why this science is so important. Because if we live 70 years never even knowing that's the case, that we'll find that the majority of the things that we do are for other than the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And one of the preconditions for the acceptance of works is sincerity. It's a precondition. That you have to be sincere in what you do in order for it to be accepted. So this is the 3rd degree. The 4th degree of riyā is that someone is a believer, whether people are there or not, they're still doing the various thing. Even if people are present, they don't have additional energy, but they do an act, and then when people find out about it, that they're happy. Why are you happy about what people, what does it matter in the end? If Allah accepts your act, why are you happy? What does it matter? Because it means that you want a high place in their heart. The only reason you're happy because now they're going to think good of you, they're going to think this and that. So you gave out a large amount of charity so that no one knows, and all of a sudden it gets out. And then you're happy, right? That happiness is riyā. And that is starting to get more and more subtle, because riyā is very subtle. Riyā is like, a black ant on a dark night, right, on a rock, walking, creeping. And that riyā is very subtle, and then there's various degrees of its subtlety. And until we can learn to watch over our heart, we're not going to notice it, just as you wouldn't notice that creeping ant in that dark night on that rock. So there's even a type of riyā that's even more subtle than that. So someone's a believer, whether people are there or not, it doesn't matter. They don't get increased energy. When people find out about their actions, they actually dislike it. They don't care whether people know about what they did or not, and they do everything to hide it. But then, the most subtle form of riyā is that someone that because of something that they've attained, whether it be knowledge or they're a person of worship, is that when they go into public, that they expect people to say salams to them first. They come into a gathering, they expect people to make room for them. That they expect people to treat them a certain way. Right? Meaning that is a very, very subtle form of riyā. And were it not to be that they themselves think that they deserve something, that from those people, or somehow done it for them, that they wouldn't expect that from them. And this is why you'll see that the true people of Allah, first, that they think that everyone in the room is better than them. And that they don't see themselves as better than a dog or anything, any inanimate object. And we'll be talking about that when it comes to kibr. And at the same time, that they're content to sit at the back with the shoes. And that there's great stories of some of the great scholars and awliya that do things that, subhanAllah, that people wouldn't even imagine. That intentionally go and clean bathrooms, right? Because that they see themselves, that's really what I could be doing. And that if we don't have the humility to go clean bathrooms or to do something that's extremely menial, then these are the type of things we have to force ourselves to do so that we can bring about sincerity in our hearts. So that's the most subtle form, and the danger is that someone, even if they're not around people, is that they could be mura'i, they could be ostentatious, even if they're at home. And the example that they mention is that they're reading a book and they read a beautiful fa'idah, a benefit, and that they memorize it in order to tell people so that people could praise them. That's riyā, even if there's no people around. Or someone's praying in the depths of their home, and they're praying in a way because they feel that they're going to do something then that potentially someone could praise them for. We have to be very careful the way this comes to our hearts. Now, if you're at home reading a book and you see a fa'idah, a benefit, and you want people to benefit from it, that's a great thing. But make it that you want people to benefit from it, not that you want them to praise you for it. And there's a very subtle difference between the two. One is acceptable and good, and the other is riyā and rejected. And it's very subtle. Okay. Now, the last thing we'll say about riyā is that you don't leave actions because of riyā. Meaning that even though we just said everything we just said, is that your normal course of action, what you normally do. So if we get up to pray Dhuhr prayer, and you're like, okay, I have energy to pray Dhuhr prayer. Alright, so I'm going to go pray on my own because why do I have more energy when I'm praying with the jama'ah? In that case, no, you pray like you normally do, and you force yourself to be sincere. And so as you notice these things coming to your heart, which you will, then you just fight it. And you reject it, and you force yourself to be sincere. So you don't leave something that you're doing or intended to do out of fear. You notice it, dislike it, and replace it with sincerity and understanding that what you're doing is for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And the more and more we do that, and this is why this is mujahada. This is why this is jihad al-akbar. And this is not a controversial hadith, even though it's weak. The majority, if not all of our scholars have understood this meaning throughout the centuries, is that struggling against your soul is the jihad al-akbar. Why? Because every single moment of your day that you have your nafs that is with you, your nafs is you. It is you. And you can never let it, you can never not be watchful over it. You have to watch over it in every moment. Because that you never know what's going to come to your heart next. And then you have to struggle with it. And you will find, once you understand the importance of the struggle and start making the struggle, it is not easy. It is a long process, day after day, year after year. It might take you 50 years to overcome one aspect of your nafs. Right? But the beauty is that Allah Ta'ala swears by the nafs al-lawwama, the reproachful soul, which means that very act of reproaching yourself and that trying to better yourself is something that's very beloved to Allah Ta'ala. Inna Allah yuhibb al-mutatahhirin. Inna Allah yuhibb al-tawwabin. Yuhibb al-mutatahhirin. He loves those that repent often and those who are seeking to be pure. He didn't say Inna Allah yuhibb al-mutahharin or al-tahirin. Those who have been purified or are pure. Those that are seeking to be pure. And so meaning that that is beloved to Allah, we can become beloved to Allah from the very process of seeking purity. So that is riya. Then he also mentions hasad. Hasad is envy. Nas'al Allah Ta'ala as-salama wal-afiyah. Al-hasud la yusud. The envious person will, la ilaha illallah, that they will never ever truly be content. Is that some of the most tormented people are the people of envy. And our Prophet ﷺ said, Al-hasadu ya'kul al-hasanat kama ta'kul nar al-hatab. That envy eats your good deeds the way fire consumes wood. So you can imagine that metaphor of fire and just the bonfire last night, and the way that it consumed all of the wood. But hasad, that's what it does to your good deeds, is it just consumes it. And that the thing about hasad is, the reason it's such a bad thing is because you're questioning the divine will. Allah says, أَمْ يَحْسُدُونَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ أو عَلَى مَا آتَاهُم مِنْ فَضْلِهِ بدون الله, huh? أَمْ يَحْسُدُونَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَا آتَاهُم مِنْ فَضْلِهِ أَمْ يَحْسُدُونَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Do they have envy, do people have envy for what Allah Ta'ala has given them from His bounty? So meaning that this was the divine will for these people to receive Allah's bounty. That who are you? You're nothing. What are we? What are we? Nothing. To be able to oppose the divine will. Allah Ta'ala through His wisdom decided to give Fulan, so and so, such and such a thing. And then you are, have problems with that. And that you don't, you don't want it to go to so and so. Oh, a'udhu billah. That it was revealed to, in one of the previous books, that Allah Ta'ala has not created anything that it opposes Him in creation except the nafs. The single, only thing that opposes Allah Ta'ala in all of His creation, from the beginning of time until now, from all the different stages of creation, everything that He's created, from the mulk and the malakut and any of the other realms, the only thing that opposes Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is the nafs. It's the only thing. Nothing else in existence opposes Him Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Potentially. And so that puny little nothingness nafs, that to oppose the will of Rabbul Alameen, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That from here you can understand that the gravity of envy, and from here you can also understand the gravity of ma'asiyah, of disobedience. Because who do we think we are? That we're going to oppose the Rabbul Alameen. So that some of them also point to that this being one of the first khati'at that were committed, one of the first sins. And it was the hasad of Iblis, of Adam alayhi salam. And that when he was told to prostrate to him, and he refused to, out of envy. And so that hasad, that its reality is having an istithqal, feeling heavy in your heart for someone to have been given a blessing. And that there's a difference between hasad and ghibta. That hasad is feeling that sense of heaviness that someone's been given a blessing and wanting it to be removed from them. Whereas ghibta, which is a positive envy, which is you recognize that someone was given a blessing, but you're happy that they're given a blessing. And on top of that, that you wish that you could have that as well, which there's nothing wrong with that. You see someone who's been given memorization of the Quran, someone who's been given knowledge, that to desire that's from iman, from faith. Right? As long as you don't want it to be removed from them, and you ask Allah Ta'ala for it, Allah Ta'ala could give everyone, all those things. And so that the person of hasad, that one is that not only are they not changing the situation outwardly, and in fact by having envy people are getting their good deeds. So the people aren't losing the blessings, they're getting your good deeds, and you're tormenting yourself internally. It is a lose-lose situation. There's nothing you are winning by being envious towards other people. And fil muqabil, that in the opposite state though, that if you're content with the blessings that Allah Ta'ala has given, that our scholars have told us that by having the rida and being content with the blessings that Allah Ta'ala gives His creation, is that from the secret of that contentment you will benefit from every blessing that Allah Ta'ala has given anyone. So if you just this is why the actions of the heart are greater than the actions of the limbs. If you sit down for a period of 5 minutes at night and you reflect upon rida, contentment, and you bring about in your heart, Ya Rab, I'm content with all the blessings you've given from any of your creation, from Adam alayhi salam until now, and all of those that are going to, I am content, Ya Rabbil Alameen. The prophecy that you gave to the prophets, and the suhbah that you gave to the sahaba, and the fala'il and the merit that you gave to the families of the prophets, and all of those righteous from the ummah, and all the different categories of the sabiqun, and the muqarrabun, and the salihun, and the shuhada, and so forth. That if you're content with all of that, you will have a portion of every single one of those blessings that Allah Ta'ala gave to every single one of those people by being content with the blessing. Does it mean through contentment that it opens up incredible doors, for you to benefit from everything that is around you. And so that this is the way that we combat this, is that we recognize is that envy is only harmful towards us, and that the opposite of that is actually beneficial for us. It's ilm and amal, knowledge and action. And then at a very practical level, if someone in a moment does feel envy, and you feel like istithqal, like a heaviness that someone's given a blessing, that the way that you overcome that is that you make dua for that person. So you find out about so-and-so, that they just got a new job and you're looking for a similar job, or they just got married and you also wanted to get married, and then it's hard for you to bear that, right? The way you do it is that you make dua for them. May Allah give them tawfiq, may Allah give them a raise, may Allah, and you make dua for them then. And by making dua for them and forcing yourself to do that, it will slowly loosen the knot of hasad until the point you'll reach where you become pure, and that you won't hear about any blessing that anyone's given except that you'll become overjoyed. Now, the last thing we'll say about hasad is that generally speaking, envy usually happens between people that are at the same level, colleagues. Usually people don't have envy towards people that are way ahead of them or way below them. And that, friends that both are in medical school, friends that are both in the same university, friends that are both in the same profession, or around the same age, or this is where envy really rises to the surface. And especially with brothers, students of knowledge, some of them becoming known, others of them not becoming known, some of them receiving patronage, others not. This opens up huge doors for envy to come between people and so forth. And that once you recognize that you can start to see these tendencies come, and then you have to combat them, you have to fight them. And that the purer that you become, the more overjoyed that you'll feel that when people have blessings. And that actually would be eventually the default state then, where it's a feeling of joy and contentment with the blessings that Allah Ta'ala has given. That takes us to the third disease that he mentions of the foundational disease, which is ujub, vanity or self-conceit. He didn't mention kibr, but it's related to kibr. So we have ujub and we have kibr. Kibr is arrogance, is haughtiness, is pride. Ujub is vanity and self-conceit. The difference between ujub and kibr is that arrogance requires another person for you to be arrogant towards, whereas self-conceit only requires yourself. You're impressed with yourself because of something that you've been given. And that Allah says, وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ فَلَمْ تُغْنِ عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا. Allah says on the day of Hunayn that your numbers impressed you and it didn't help you at all. And this was a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in reality. Is that because if you have ujub and you're impressed with yourself, and then Allah Ta'ala that it first takes that away from you such that it appears like you're going to be defeated, right? That's actually a blessing, because if you're impressed with yourself and anything you've been given, if Allah loves you, is that He will take it away from you so that you then fail, and you can recognize that He is the one who gives you victory, subhanahu wa ta'ala, not anything that you've done. And so the reality of the reality of ujub, self-conceit, is that when someone is given a blessing, is that they don't attribute that blessing to being from Allah. They see it as being from their self. And so that the way that you combat self-conceit is that you with shukr, with gratitude, and that in fact that as subtle as we said riya is, ujub is even more subtle than riya. And that in Minhaj al-Abidin, Imam Ghazali, this is the very last obstacle that we have to overcome. And you overcome it with shukr and hamd, where you're just constantly in a state of praise and thanks, praise and thanks. And you get more, every time you do that, you get more and more and more blessings and more bounty, and you just give thanks and thanks and thanks. That you never see it as being from something you've done. You have to do things outwardly, and you have to act, and you have to strive, and you have to struggle. But you see even that very act of striving and struggling as being from Allah. And if you're given anything, even if you worked outwardly to get it, is that you see it all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in reality there's no blessing except from Allah. That even your own striving, where did it come from? That where did you have your body to begin with to even be able to strive? Everything, every blessing in reality is from Allah Ta'ala. But by thinking about this, that it brings about in us a deep sense of gratitude, which will combat the self-conceit where we stop and attribute blessings to ourselves. And that this is one of the closer and closer we get to the end of time, the more that this will be a predominant trait. And our Prophet ﷺ said that thalathun muhlikat, there are three things that are destructive. Shuhun muta', someone having avarice, miserliness, that they follow, meaning that they don't give out their wealth because of miserliness. وَهَوَانْ مُتَّبَعْ, and desires that are followed. وَإِعْجَابُ الْمَرْءِ بِرَأْيِهِ, and a man being impressed with his own opinion. And in one narration that if you see this, فَعَلَيْكَ بِخَاصَةِ نَفْسِكَ, meaning if you start to see these tendencies happen, just worry about your own self. And we tend to forget that. Right? In certain times, that although that we don't have a dichotomy between, private worship and public service, that there are times though where it's better to focus on yourself. There are times though that it's better to stay out of things. There are certain times, and that there's times where it's better just to focus on yourself, because were you to try to do something, that it might lead to a greater harm. Okay. Now this is related to kibr. This is related to arrogance, because arrogance is seeing yourself better than other people or better than anything. And Allah Ta'ala says, سَأَصْرِفُ عَنْ آيَاتِيَ الَّذِينَ يَتَكَبَّرُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ, نَسْأَلُ اللَّهَ السَّلَامَةَ وَالْعَافِيَةَ, that I will divert my signs from those who show arrogance in the earth without right. Allah is al-mutakabbir, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one that is truly deserving to be prideful and to be proud, not us. We are abd. We are slaves of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and our honor is in that we are servants and slaves of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. But Allah is so, if someone has arrogance, that they will be diverted from the signs of God. In any form of arrogance. That in our context here, in the United States and in the West, that racism is a form of arrogance. As long as people are seeing Islam as the religion of, backwards brown people from the Arabian Peninsula, or the only people that need it are people that don't have anywhere else to go in our society. Right? As long as they see that, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, there's going to be a thick veil between them and accepting the truth. And they're going to be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be crushed and punished eternally because of their own arrogance. Who are you to be arrogant? Who do you think you are? That you're going to have arrogance of that nature? بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ. You have no right to think like that. That you, who gave you, who do you think you are to have a hold on truth claims? And to think that you have the only way to look at the world. And that the sister co-term of genocide is epistemicide. That there's people that genocide is, right, killing a massive amount of people. But along with genocide goes epistemicide, where there are people that really think is that they have the only way to truly know, and no one else has an ability to know. Who gave you that right? Who said? Who said that you have to understand that knowledge from a Western perspective? If not, it's not accepted. Who said that? Right? And we have to be very firm on these types of things. And sometimes is that you have to show arrogance to an arrogant person to get them to come down on their arrogance. And this should be part of our khitab to our people here. That they need to humble themselves, right? Because that Western man has oppressed and harmed more people in the history of humankind than anyone else. And that all you have to do is look at the numbers, read the study body count, and then we'll come back and have another conversation, right? And people need to know that the problem is not Muslims, the problem is their own selves. They need to stop projecting their own problems on everyone else, and they need to be self-reflective and to look at their own selves. But this is a tahdeed shadid, that if Allah Ta'ala, you will not see the signs of God if you're arrogant. You will be veiled, and then you'll be raised up as ants and be trampled Yawm al-Qiyamah. The mutakabbirun, the arrogant people, will be raised up as ants on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and they'll be trampled because of what they did. We should be humble people, that we should be able to benefit from anyone and everyone. The Prophet ﷺ is Sayyidu Waladi Adam. He is the Sayyid, he is the liege lord of the children of Adam. The place that he was born is the al-Qura. It's the center of the world. In the physical world and in the spiritual world. The Bayt al-Ma'mur, which is in the 7th heaven, where a rock to fall from, it would fall right to the Kaaba. This is the center of the world. And it's the embryonic city. And it gave birth to the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And if people are caught up on anything else other than seeing the khususi and the special nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He gave our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that's their problem. And they need to get over it. We need to help them to get over it. And to remind them, but in the end that's their problem. Just as even people from his own tribe, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the yatim of Bani Hashim, they saw the orphan of Bani Hashim. That why did it come to him? Why didn't it come to one of these two men from one of the great cities? Right? Khalas, kibr, arrogance. And that, the way that you overcome arrogance is by learning humility. And is by having takalluf, forcing yourself to do things of the actions of the humble, and then eventually you will naturally become humble. That we should be willing to sit with anyone and everyone, despite the color of their sin, despite the amount of money they make, despite their status, is that we should be willing to sit with everyone and have a relationship with everyone and befriend everyone. If not, that we need to look and reflect on our own state, because we're not in a good state. So then he goes on to say, وَعَنَ بِأَنَّ الْأَصْلَ لِلْآفَاتِ حُبَّ الرِّيَاسَةِ وَتَرْهَ الْآتِ. Know that the origin of all these ills is love of leadership and procrastination. So love of leadership, wanting to be in charge, wanting to have people be the go-to guy, wanting to be in charge, right? This and procrastination, which are the two greatest subdivisions of love of this world. Our Prophet ﷺ said that حُبَّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسُ كُلِّ الْخَطِيئَةِ. Love of this world is the fountainhead of all sin, of all wrong action. Meaning that this is the greatest thing that we need to learn how to uproot from our hearts, is the love of this world. And replace it with the love of the akhirah. The love of this world and the love of the next world are like the east and the west. Is that the more you move closer to one, the further that you move away from the other. That it's like two substances. The more you pour one into your heart, the less you have of the other. This is the reality. And that this is the description of our Prophet ﷺ, is that when he was asked that in the end of time, that after people will eat from us the way that they eat from a plate, will we be many on that day, Ya Rasulullah? No, you'll be many, but you will be like that you'll be like foam on from a flash flood. And he said, why was this the case? Because of wahan, because of this weakness. And what was it? Hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyat al-maut. Love of this world and dislike to die. This is the foundation of all of the various destructive vices that come. And then what branches off that is love of leadership and procrastination. Is that procrastinating out of love of the world? I'll do it later, I'll do it later. The problem with procrastination is every time you procrastinate, the next time becomes more difficult. If you do it twice, it becomes even more difficult. 3 times, even more difficult, till people end up procrastinating their whole lives, until their hearts become black and sealed, and it's too late. So love of leadership and procrastination, then from that, it leads to arrogance, conceit, self-conceit, envy and ostentation, and then from those a whole bunch of other diseases come. And so that we have to learn what are the various diseases of the heart, and that we have to understand that they exist. We have to then know the way that they come to us. Then we have to know how to rid ourselves of them. But all this is done by watching over the heart, and so that we can take this seriously. And the point of this text is, this is a Fard Ain text, is an individual, is to point to show that these things exist. Because as it's been said, that if someone doesn't study the science of the heart, they'll die with arrogance in their heart and they don't even know. They'll die musir al-kabair. They'll die persistently committing major wrong actions they don't even know. Because envy and arrogance are major wrong actions. And that when we were studying this with Shaykh Khotri in 1997, he said, if you think that you're better than a dog, he said, you're still arrogant. If you think you're better than a dog. Because in reality, the fact of the matter is you don't know. If you don't pass over the traverse, nasallallahu al-afiyah, yawm al-qiyamah. Dogs, right, they disappear. Right? But you don't cross over the traverse, then that dog that disappears is better than you. And so we don't know. You can't think you're better than this microphone or this tree that is right here. Because you really don't know if it's true or not. If you enter into Jannah, nah, you were. But you don't know as of right now. And this is why you can't think you're better than anyone. Even you're walking down the street and you see a kafir that has tattoos from head to toe, that is selling drugs, that is doing every sin in the book. You can't even think you're better than them. Why? Because you don't know what's going to be your seal. That Allah might bless that person with Islam, and they might come back, and you don't know if you're going to die on your own faith. You see someone older than you that you say, they've been in Islam longer than I am. Who am I? They must be better than me. You see someone younger than you, they must be better than I am. I have more sins. I've been in Islam longer than they have. Hakada. You see someone more knowledgeable than you, that they must be because they have more knowledge than I. You see someone less knowledgeable than you, that they must be better than me because I have knowledge and don't practice it. Hakada. That you don't think you're better than anyone, and all of this takes knowledge and struggle with the soul. And then finally, on the last point we'll mention here, is he says, لَيْسَ الدَّوَاء إِلَّا فِي الضِّرَارِ لَهُ, which has no cure but to be compelled to flee to him. Al-idtirar is one of the greatest of all of the qualities and attributes of the heart, that we have to have this quality in our heart. Idtirar is recognizing you have nowhere else to turn except to Allah. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَى. That this is the secret to have your prayers answered, is that you feel you're in a state of idtirar and that you're in absolute need of your Lord. Once you recognize the spiritual path that's before you, it's overwhelming. all of these diseases, how do I overcome it? How am I going to do this? Right? If you're left to yourself, you can't do it. Right? The only way you can do it is turn to Allah. And one of the wisdoms of why all of this is happening is so you turn to Allah. I had a friend who was in prison, and that he was in this small cell, concrete cell. He told me he was about to literally go crazy. He said he literally was about to go Majnoon, completely crazy. He said he wanted to like punch a wall and just completely lash out. He said in that moment that all of those frustrations, all of everything that was going through his mind, he kneeled down next to his bed and he directed that energy to God. And he supplicated and he prayed to God. He said a week later I became Muslim. And that if Allah loves you, He will put you into a state where you're just wringed out to the point where you think like you're going to expire. And if you, in that moment, you direct it to Allah, that's more powerful than any nuclear or atomic bomb. Right? That is the most powerful thing of all. And that this is why that we should be putting ourselves, we should be doing this daily. That, turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Tareem, where I studied, one of the things that they do every single night in the last third of the night, collectively, in a group, is that they say, Ya Allah, 200 times. And they say a dua bi asma' al-husna. And you have, 250 men together, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. And they say that what you're supposed to do while you're saying Ya Allah is just to all of your intentions, direct it to your Lord in that moment. And that you will find ajaib and wonders of the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes your condition, all of these diseases of the heart, all of your anxieties, everything related to your work and everything that's difficult for you, all of your problems, whether it be related to your family, your children, or anything else in general, your health problems, is that you have to take all of that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be in a state of iltirar, realizing that you are in absolute need of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and that you have nowhere else to turn except to He subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the foundation of the foundations of the cure, is that in everything is that we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us to be from those who are constantly in the state of idtirar, realizing we're in absolute need of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, constantly in the state of inkisar, realizing that we're entirely broken before Him, constantly in the state of dhillah, that we recognize our humility before Him, constantly in the state of tadarra', where we're petitioning Him night and day, constantly in the state of tawadu', we're constantly in the state of humility before Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, always in these states that we recognize that we are abid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah wa ta'ala raise us in rank and bless us to be inshallah ta'ala always moving in a state of ascending to drawing near to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala purify our hearts of all diseases, bless our limbs to always be in a state of obedience, and to bless us inshallah ta'ala. He blesses with the elect of the awliya and the salihin. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.